Lina's life in Lagos had always been a careful rhythm of studies, family, and quiet ambitions. She spent her days translating documents for local businesses and occasionally helping her friends with personal projects. Her world was orderly, predictable, and safe. She never expected that one encounter could ripple through her carefully structured life, reshaping it in ways she could not foresee. The collision happened in the sleek lobby of Madame Abeni's foundation, where Lina had been assigned to assist a visiting Korean filmmaker, Park Minjae. He was calm, precise, and immediately different from anyone she had met, neither flashy nor imposing, but quietly attentive. The project required translation between him and local artists, and circumstances forced them to spend days together. Lina felt the weight of responsibility. This was not just words she would translate, but stories, emotions, and cultural depth. As she walked alongside him through Lagos streets, she noticed how he observed not the famous tourist spots, but the everyday life, the painted walls, the children playing, the women selling roasted corn and suya. At one street mural depicting a girl with braids intertwined with waves, he said softly, "It feels free. Her hand reaches out, not up. She wants to touch the world, not rise above it." Lina felt a stir inside her. He didn't just see the colors, he felt the intention. In the hotel lounge later over hibiscus tea, their conversation unfolded naturally. Minjae shared how writing had taught him to speak to himself, and Lina realized that translation was more than words. It was storytelling, empathy, and respect. He listened in ways that made her feel truly seen. Their collaboration became a quiet dance of understanding and shared purpose, laying the foundation for something deeper. Soon, they flew to Seoul, and Lina stepped into a world both foreign and mesmerizing. The crisp air, the crowded streets, and the melodic call of vendors formed a rhythm unlike Lagos, yet equally alive. Minji guided her calmly, translating announcements and observing the city with keen attention. Together they explored studios, museums, and music conservatories, translating artists' words and the emotions beneath them. Lina shared stories of Nigerian music, rhythms, and traditions, and Minjae absorbed every nuance with quiet admiration. In their shared time, they noticed subtleties. The way Minjae smiled at music crescendos, how he paused to listen to a street performer, and how he asked questions not for information alone, but for understanding. Lina realized that connection could exist quietly, in gestures, in attention, in mutual respect. Snow fell one evening as they walked together after a long day. He steadied her when her boots slipped, and she felt warmth in his presence, a comfort born not of romance but of care and trust. Vulnerability deepened their bond. Minji shared childhood stories of shyness and words he could not speak. Lina realized that their connection was as much about hearts learning to listen as it was about words. Evenings became quiet reflections over tea, notes, and conversations about life, culture, and dreams. They discovered parallels between Yoruba proverbs and Korean poetry, between Nigerian drum rhythms and Korean pansori. The project was no longer just professional, it was a bridge for understanding, patience, and shared humanity. The midpoint of their journey arrived subtly. While translating and collaborating, they began to recognize an emotional connection, still unspoken, but undeniable. The trust, respect, and shared purpose between them had grown into a quiet awareness of each other's hearts. Yet, even with this awakening, their differences surfaced. A planned trip to rural Korea challenged Lina's confidence, and she realized she would need courage, faith, and self-trust. Minjae offered support without pressure, and in this gentle tension, they learned patience and compromise, lessons that strengthened their bond. Then came the separation. Lina returned to Lagos to continue interviews, and Minjae remained in Seoul. The physical distance was challenging, but both grew individually. Lina discovered confidence in her voice and skill, carrying stories with care and empathy. Minjae refined his scripts, learning to honor nuance and emotion in the absence of her physical presence. Though apart, their hearts grew closer through reflection, prayer, and the quiet recognition of the other's impact on their growth. When Lina returned to Seoul, the reunion was simple, unspoken, and profoundly moving. No grand declarations, no dramatic gestures, only the calm acknowledgement of hearts aligned. They walked along riverside paths, sharing reflections, laughter, and quiet gratitude. Together they revisited artists, storytellers, and musicians, translating with finesse, listening with patience, and observing with care. Their bond had matured, rooted in shared experiences, understanding, and respect. As the project concluded, the exhibition of Afro-Korean art celebrated the blending of cultures, stories, and perspectives. Audiences were moved by the depth and authenticity of the storytelling. Behind the scenes, Lina and Minjae quietly recognized the growth in themselves and each other. Their connection was not defined by romance alone, but by mutual respect, emotional awareness, and the ability to carry each other's perspectives with tenderness. Finally, walking along the lantern-lit streets of Seoul, Lina reflected, true connection is built not in grand gestures but in patience, understanding, and care. Their hearts had quietly aligned, bridging worlds, cultures, and experiences. The project had been a success, but more importantly, they had built a bridge between themselves, one that would carry both their stories and their hearts forward. Lina returned to Lagos with a renewed sense of purpose, confident in her voice and strengthened by her experiences. Minjae continued his work in Seoul, carrying her influence in his observations, reflections, and writings. They remained connected, not merely by collaboration, but by the unspoken understanding that had grown between them, a bond nurtured through empathy, patience, and the shared act of translating not just words, but hearts. The journey had begun with translation, but it ended with something far deeper, a quiet, enduring bridge of hearts and understanding, built between two people and two cultures, carrying the promise of growth, harmony, and shared humanity. The meeting concluded with signatures, schedules, and a quiet promise hanging in the air. When Lina walked out of the building, the sunlight felt sharper, almost unreal. The world around her, the traffic, the voices, the smell of suya roasting on a nearby grill, felt louder, as if life had leaned closer. Beside her, Park Minjae walked with his hands in his pockets, silent but observant. Unlike other visitors who sought out famous landmarks, he seemed drawn to the ordinary. The painted walls, the graffiti, the way people greeted strangers with ease. At the gate, the foundation car was waiting. Lina hesitated for a moment, unsure whether to walk away or join the ride. Madame Abeni smiled knowingly. "Go together," she said. "The best stories begin when strangers share small spaces." Lina nodded and followed Minjae into the car. Lagos streets moved like a river, hawkers weaving between cars and selling everything from water bottles to phone chargers. Music escaped from open windows, Afrobeat rhythms layered over laughter and debate. Lina pointed to a mural painted on a long wall beside the road. It showed a girl wearing braids intertwined with sea waves, reaching out toward a rising sun. "That one is called Daughter of the Atlantic," she explained. "A young artist painted it after visiting Badagry Beach. She said the ocean felt like a mother, pulling and pushing her dreams at the same time." Minjae's gaze lingered on the mural. "It feels free," he said softly. "You see freedom?" Lina asked, surprised that he didn't focus on the ocean or the colors. "Yes," he replied. "Her hand reaches out, not up. She wants to touch the world, not rise above it." It was a simple observation, but Lina felt something stir. He didn't interpret it literally. He saw emotion, intention. The car turned onto a quieter street lined with small shops and a few palm trees swaying lightly in the heat. At a red light, a group of children performed a dance routine on the sidewalk, laughing as they tried to stay in sync. Minji smiled, the first smile she had seen from him. "They practice even when no one is watching," he said. "That's Lagos," Lina replied. "It breathes ambition." At the hotel lobby, the smell of jasmine and polished wood greeted them, accompanied by the soft piano melody from hidden speakers. Lina followed Minjae to a corner table with a view of the bustling street through the glass wall. A waiter brought water and hibiscus tea, served in elegant glasses. Minjae tasted it, eyes widening slightly at the sweet tart flavor. "It's made from hibiscus petals," Lina explained. "Very common here." "It tastes red," he said thoughtfully. "In Korean, flavors and colors sometimes mix in expression." Lina laughed gently. "It makes sense. Some tastes feel like colors." For the first time, conversation came naturally, without forced questions or polite interviews. "Why did you apply for this project?" Minjae asked. Lina took a breath. "I love stories, but I don't know how to write them. Translation is the closest I've come to storytelling. When I translate, I feel like I'm carrying someone else's dreams, helping them reach another world." Minjae nodded slowly. "That is writing. We translate life into words. You translate words into life." His answer surprised her. She had expected something technical, something script-focused. Instead, he spoke of writing like emotion first, structure second. "And you?" Lina asked. "Why did you accept this project?" He looked out the window, watching the street. "When I was a child," he began, "I didn't speak much. Not because I couldn't. I just didn't know how to express what I felt. Words came to me late, not in conversation, but in stories. Writing taught me how to speak to myself. Now I want to learn how others speak to the world." The honesty in his tone made Lina pause. There was no dramatic pause, no intention to impress, just truth. This is why they had chosen him, she thought. He writes from the heart he once couldn't explain. Later, Madame Abeni joined them with documents summarizing their travel schedule. They would leave for Seoul the next morning, stay for 6 weeks, then return to Nigeria for the second half. "You will interview filmmakers, poets, and street performers," she said. "You will collect stories, the kind that don't make headlines, the kind that live in homes and songs." She looked at Lina. "You're not just translating Korean into English, you're translating Africa into a language the world listens to." She turned to Minjae. "And you must let this place change how you see storytelling." Both nodded, understanding the responsibility, not financial, but spiritual. Stories could carry dignity, respect, and shared humanity. As the meeting closed, Abeni added with a knowing smile, "Remember, the beauty of culture is not in similarity, but in difference. Learn from each other. Even disagreements will teach you." Outside the glass wall, the Lagos evening gathered, the sky painted with purple haze as the sun made its descent. By the time Lina returned home, her mother was preparing dinner, rice steaming on the stove, fried plantains sizzling in a pan. The familiar smells warmed her heart. "You look tired," her mother said knowingly. Lina laughed softly. "Excited, not tired." She told her about the trip, the project, the writer from Korea. Her mother listened with a calm smile, then said something simple but powerful. "Speak with confidence. You're going to be a bridge between worlds. Bridges must be strong." That night, Lina sat by her window watching the moon cast silver light over the street. Somewhere across the city, Minjae was probably preparing for the journey in silence. She didn't know if they would become friends, colleagues, or simply strangers sharing a project. But she knew the story had already begun writing itself. She whispered a quiet prayer, not for fame or success, but for courage. In another part of the city, Minjae opened his notebook and wrote a single sentence. "Sometimes language begins where words end. Two hearts, two stories, walking different paths toward a shared journey. Tomorrow the plane would lift them into the sky, carrying them from Lagos to Seoul." The translation had begun. The plane touched down in Incheon Airport just as the winter sun began its slow climb over Seoul's skyline. The city glinted with glass towers and bustling streets, a rhythm Lina had never experienced. Cold air filled the cabin as passengers disembarked, and Lina tightened her scarf, feeling the unfamiliar chill against her skin. She had never imagined that the warmth of Lagos would be replaced by this crisp, vibrant city. Minjae walked beside her, calm and composed, as though he had always belonged to this place. He moved with quiet certainty, reading signs in Hangul, guiding her through customs, and occasionally translating announcements in a soft, precise voice. Every so often he glanced at her with what seemed like polite curiosity, and Lina felt herself measuring her own nerves, hoping she wouldn't make a mistake. Once they were outside, the city revealed itself fully. Taxis honked in harmony with the distant subway trains. Street vendors called out in melodic Korean, offering roasted chestnuts and tteokbokki. Neon signs blinked over the sidewalks while college students hurried past with thick coats and backpacks. "This city, it's alive in a different way," Lina said, careful with her Korean pronunciation. Minjae nodded. "Seoul has rhythm too," he replied. "Faster perhaps, but it sings." Lina smiled, remembering how he had described Lagos the previous day. Both cities, so different, yet both filled with life and stories waiting to be discovered. Their first assignment brought them to a small art studio in Insadong, where a group of local painters worked in silence. Minja's task was to interview them about inspiration, technique, and the stories behind their work. Lina translated carefully, not just words but the nuances of meaning. She watched how Minja's brow furrowed when he considered a painter's metaphor, how his hands gestured gently when he wanted to clarify a question, and how he leaned closer when he needed to catch every word. One young painter with ink-stained hands spoke of Han, the feeling of unresolved sorrow that could transform into beauty. Lina translated slowly, carefully, trying to preserve the subtlety. Minjae listened intently, then smiled softly. "In Nigeria, we have something similar," Lina said in English, her voice quiet. "It's called ori, The guiding spirit of our ancestors. It shapes who we are even if we don't see it. Minjae's eyes widened slightly. "Tell me more," he said, and she did, explaining how every decision, every tradition, and every story of their ancestors influenced their daily lives. He nodded, absorbing each detail, not as a visitor but as a student of culture. Later, they walked through the streets, visiting small coffee shops, bookshops, and Hanak houses. Lina struggled to keep pace with his calm steps and precise attention to detail, but she was beginning to notice that the quiet way he observed the world made him approachable. He asked questions, yes, but in a way that invited stories, not judgment. At a small bookstore, he picked up a volume of poetry and read aloud a few lines. Lina smiled at his accent, careful but deliberate, as he pronounced each word with care. "Poetry is universal," he said softly. "Even if we speak different languages, it touches the same heart." She felt a warmth rise in her chest. It wasn't attraction exactly, not yet, but a recognition of a mind and heart willing to listen, to learn, to understand. Their evenings were filled with translation work. Minjae wrote questions and scripts in Korean, and Lina translated them into English with explanations where needed. At times, they paused to sip tea or hot chocolate from street vendors, watching the city lights reflect on the Han River. One evening, after a particularly long day of interviews, Lina asked, "Do you ever miss home?" Minjae considered it. "Sometimes. I miss the quiet streets, the sounds I grew up with, the way people move through life without overthinking, but I also enjoy discovering new rhythms." Lina nodded, understanding entirely. Lagos and Seoul were different, yet each could teach lessons about patience, adaptation, and observation. "You adapt fast," she said. He smiled faintly. "I have a good guide." She flushed slightly but quickly turned her attention to the notes in her folder. Gradually, their relationship became smoother. Not in romance, that had not yet begun, but in trust. Lina could anticipate when Minjae needed clarification, and he could sense when a translation required more than literal words, an explanation of context, emotion, or cultural nuance. They began to share small stories about family, about childhood memories, about music that shaped them. One afternoon, while walking through Gyeongbokgung Palace, Lina explained the festivals in Lagos, the masquerades, the music competitions, the ceremonies that marked harvest and life milestones. Minjae listened, fascinated, asking questions about how traditions shaped identity. "And the people," he asked quietly, "do they notice when something is off, like a tradition forgotten?" "They notice," Lina replied. "We are taught to value stories. Even the smallest gesture has meaning. That is why translation is more than words. It's respect." Minjae nodded thoughtfully, looking over the palace gardens, the intricate woodwork and tiles. "Respect," he repeated softly, almost to himself. In that moment, Lina realized that the project was not only about art or film, it was about two hearts learning to see the world from another perspective, and perhaps without either of them fully knowing, learning to see each other. Evenings in Seoul were quiet compared to Lagos. Lina often sat by the window of her small hotel room, writing notes, practicing Korean phrases, or reflecting on the day. Sometimes Minjae would join her to finalize translations, and their conversations drifted toward hopes, regrets, and dreams they had yet to speak aloud. He never imposed, never rushed, but there was a growing comfort in his presence, a sense of patience, understanding, and quiet reassurance that Lina had never experienced before. By the end of the first week, she realized something profound. Their work required more than language. It required empathy, observation, and a willingness to carry each other's perspectives gently, faithfully. And in that realization, she felt the first stirrings of something deeper, a connection that had nothing to do with attraction and everything to do with hearts beginning to understand one another. Seoul's winter deepened as the days went on. Lina had grown used to the crisp air, the soft crunch of snow beneath her boots, and the quiet mornings when the city seemed almost contemplative before the bustle began. Minjae remained calm, always early, his schedule precise, but now Lina noticed small gestures. The way he paused to listen to the laughter of children passing by, the way he tilted his head slightly to better hear a street musician, or the way he took a moment to appreciate a painting before asking questions. On one particularly cold morning, Lina met him outside a traditional Hanak tea house. The warm scent of steamed barley greeted her as they entered. Minjae removed his gloves carefully, almost ceremoniously, and placed them beside her on the table. "I thought you might like some warmth," he said softly, handing her a cup of tea with a faint smile. Lina accepted it with a quiet nod. It was a small gesture, yet she felt it carry more than kindness. It carried attention, thoughtfulness, and respect. They sat in silence for a few minutes, listening to the hiss of water and the occasional laugh from the shopkeepers outside. Lina let the calmness settle in, her fingers wrapped around the steaming cup. "You adapt well," Minjae said after a while, his voice breaking the quiet gently. "Many visitors struggle with Seoul's rhythm. You, you flow with it." Lina smiled faintly. "I guess I've always flowed with rhythm. Lagos teaches you that." He nodded. "I think I understand." Later that day, they visited a local market known for its handmade crafts. Lina led Minjae through narrow alleys explaining the significance of certain items: a hand-woven basket symbolizing community, a carved wooden mask representing ancestral respect, a small talisman for protection against misfortune. Minjae handled each object carefully, never rushing, always asking about its meaning. When Lina explained the story behind the talisman, he asked quietly, "Do you believe it works?" Lina paused. She had been raised Christian and had always balanced respect for tradition with her faith. "I believe it reminds people to stay mindful. That in itself is powerful." He nodded thoughtfully. "Mindfulness, that is a kind of faith too." Lina looked at him, surprised by the insight in his simple words. They were from different worlds, different beliefs, yet in that moment, understanding bridged the gap. That evening, a sudden snowstorm slowed the city. Streets became slippery, taxis moved cautiously, and the city's rhythm seemed to pause under the falling white. Lina's small apartment was far from their meeting point, and Minjae offered to walk with her, insisting that it was safer. They moved slowly, side by side, sharing the space naturally. Lina laughed softly when her boot slipped on a patch of ice, and Minjae reached out, steadying her without comment. "You should watch your step," he said, quietly. "I will. Thanks to you," she replied, glancing at him. The walk was silent but filled with small, meaningful interactions. Their presence together without the need for words. Lina realized that comfort could be built quietly, without declarations, without dramatic gestures. It could grow simply in shared experiences, in watching someone care without being asked. When they reached her apartment, Lina hesitated before entering. "Thank you," she said, soft but sincere. "For what?" Minjae asked, already sensing the weight of the words. "For walking with me, for noticing." He nodded, offering a slight bow. "I notice. That is part of understanding." It struck Lina how true it was. Understanding didn't always need explanation. It could exist quietly in observation, patience, and small acts of care. The next day, in the studio, Minjae shared a story from his childhood, something he rarely told anyone. He spoke of being a shy boy, quiet in school, feeling as though words failed him when he needed them most. He wrote stories to make sense of emotions he could not speak. Lina listened, translating for the local artists. But she noticed she was learning more than just language. She was learning how a person could be open with someone they barely knew, trusting that the listener would respect the fragility of the story. When he finished, Lina said softly, "You are brave sharing that." Minjae looked at her, a shadow of surprise in his expression. "I think it is easier to be brave when someone listens." Lina realized that for the first time she felt the same. She could share her own small fears, the uncertainty of living between worlds, the pressure of expectations, the desire to leave a mark, and trust that he would understand, not judge. It was not romantic, not yet, but it was the foundation. Evenings became their shared time for reflection. They sat together over translation notes, tea, or just the city lights outside the window. Occasionally, they would discuss art, literature, and music, discovering parallels between Yoruba proverbs and Korean poetry, between Nigerian drum rhythms and Korean pansori. One night, Lina whispered a line from her grandmother's diary. "To understand people, listen to their hearts, not their language." Minjae repeated it almost thoughtfully in Korean. Hearts before language. And Lina realized that this project was no longer only about translating words. It was about translating lives, experiences, and emotions. And somewhere in the quiet moments, their hearts were beginning to understand one another. For the first time, Lina felt that the story they were building was bigger than the film, bigger than deadlines. It was about connection, empathy, and shared humanity. And as snow fell lightly outside the window, Lina thought that perhaps the bridge between Africa and Korea wasn't just in art or film, it was in two people, learning to carry each other's hearts with care. Seoul was slowly shaking off the last traces of winter and the days were growing longer. Lina and Minjae had begun a rhythm, morning interviews with artists, afternoons translating scripts, evenings reflecting on the day's experiences. They had shared laughter, stories of home, and quiet moments of observation that left both of them more attuned to the world around them. One afternoon, they visited a music conservatory tucked away in a narrow street of Jongno. Students practiced traditional Korean instruments, gayagyeom, jangu, and daegum, filling the room with layered melodies. Lina translated for Minjae as he asked about inspiration, discipline, and emotion in music. She watched how he listened with intent, tilting his head slightly, eyes softening at the crescendos, smiling gently at pauses in rhythm. After the session, Minjae turned to her. "Music is emotion before structure," he said. "Even before words, feelings exist." Lina nodded. "It's the same with storytelling. The emotions must be understood first, words follow." He smiled, faint and almost shy. "You understand this deeply." Her cheeks warmed slightly, but she quickly refocused on her notes. This was not a moment of romance, at least not yet. But the recognition of understanding carried weight. Later, walking back through the streets, Lina shared stories of Nigerian music, the talking drums, the rhythms that could carry messages across villages, the songs that celebrated harvests, weddings, or even mourning. Minjae listened quietly, occasionally asking questions about the technicalities of the drum patterns or the meaning of lyrics. But it was more than technical. He wanted to feel the emotion behind them, much like she had done when translating poetry. "You carry so much of your culture in every story," he observed. "It's alive in you." Lina smiled faintly, realizing for the first time that he was not just seeing her words, he was seeing her essence. The next morning, they met an elderly Korean poet who had spent decades preserving traditional storytelling. His voice was soft, trembling slightly with age, but when he recited verses, the room held still. Lina translated carefully, conveying not only the words but the cadence, the pauses, the subtle emotions in his phrasing. Minjae leaned closer, eyes reflecting quiet admiration. When the session ended, Lina suggested a nearby park for lunch. They walked side by side, carrying sandwiches and tea. A small pond reflected the sunlight and children played along its edge, feeding ducks. Minjae paused, watching the scene. "In Lagos," he said slowly, "children play in alleys and streets. Here they play with distance, space, but the laughter is the same." Lina laughed softly. "Some things are universal." There was a silence then, comfortable, like two people acknowledging the bond forming between them. It was not romance, yet it carried an awakening of something deeper, respect, admiration, and the subtle start of emotional attachment. That evening, back at the hotel, Minjae invited Lina to review his script ideas together. The story was evolving, drawing inspiration from both cultures, and Lina's translations were shaping the dialogue. As she read a section aloud, she noticed a subtle shift in Minjae's tone. He paused longer on certain lines, asking her for interpretation of emotion rather than literal meaning. "You help me understand the heartbeat of words," he said quietly. "Not just the meaning, but the feeling." Lina looked up, surprised by the vulnerability in his words. She realized that trust was growing, a trust built on attention, patience, and shared purpose. For the first time, she felt a flutter in her chest, not longing, not desire, but awareness of connection, the recognition that hearts can meet without expectation, simply in understanding. Yet, with this growing closeness came the first gentle tension. One evening, Minjae mentioned a planned trip to a remote region in Korea to interview rural storytellers. Lina hesitated. "I've never traveled alone in such areas," she admitted, uncertainty in her voice. "I don't know if I can navigate the terrain or communicate well enough without support." Minjae looked at her, not impatient, but with quiet intensity. "I thought you might want to join. Your perspective is important, but if you're uncomfortable, we can adjust." She appreciated the consideration, yet a pang of self-doubt lingered. Could she meet the expectations of this project? Could she bridge worlds with confidence? The thought weighed on her heart, and she realized that this was more than language. It was courage, belief in oneself, and faith that she could rise to the challenge. The subtle tension was not conflict between them, but a mirror of values and personal growth. Minjae valued precision and cultural immersion. Lina valued her intuition and caution. They would have to navigate these differences together, learning patience, compromise, and trust. That night, Lina reflected on the week's experiences. She thought about the artists, musicians, and poets they had met. She thought about the way Minjae listened, truly listened, to her stories, her translations, and even her silences. She whispered a quiet prayer, asking for guidance, clarity, and courage. Not for fame, not for approval, but for the strength to embrace the journey fully, to honor both her culture and his, and to build something meaningful together. Somewhere in the city, Minjae looked out over Seoul from the hotel balcony, thinking of Lagos, of its colors, sounds, and stories. He realized that understanding another culture required patience, humility, and openness. And in this process, he found himself learning not just about Nigeria, but about the quiet resilience and warmth of the woman sitting beside him in the hotel room. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but something had shifted. Hearts were awakening. And though the story was far from complete, the foundation of connection, respect, and shared purpose was now unshakable. The days after their week in Seoul had flown by, filled with interviews, translation work, and quiet walks through the city's winding streets. Yet the project's schedule was relentless, and the time had come for Lina and Minjae to temporarily part ways. Lina was to return to Lagos for a month to conduct interviews with artists and storytellers at home, while Minjae remained in Korea to finalize scripts and prepare for filming. The separation was brief, yet it carried an unexpected weight. At Incheon Airport, the air smelled of polished floors and coffee from kiosks lining the terminal. Lina clutched her small suitcase, nerves tight in her chest. She looked at Minjae, who stood beside her with quiet composure, a small, travel notebook tucked under his arm. "You will do well," he said softly, eyes meeting hers. "Trust your instincts. The stories will guide you." Lina smiled faintly. "And you?" "I will do the same, and I'll be waiting when you return," he replied. There was no dramatic flourish, no declarations, only calm sincerity. The moment lingered, quiet but profound. They exchanged a simple handshake, a gesture that somehow felt heavier than words. Then Lina turned toward the gate, glancing back once before boarding. Back in Lagos, Lina felt the city greet her differently this time. The familiar heat, the sound of street vendors, the vibrant colors, everything felt like home, yet slightly altered. She had changed. Seoul's precision, patience, and cultural depth had left a mark on her, sharpening her attention to detail while opening her mind to new ways of seeing the world. Her first interviews upon returning were at small community centers and local art studios. Lina spoke with painters, poets, and musicians, translating not just their words but their experiences for Minjae to understand remotely. She realized that being apart from him made her more confident. She trusted herself to carry the bridge between worlds alone. Yet, in quiet moments, she missed his calm presence, the way he had listened, the subtle gestures that made her feel seen. She reflected on the lessons they had learned together, patience, empathy, and how connection could exist without grand gestures or declarations. One afternoon, while sitting by a small riverbank, Lina observed children playing in the water, their laughter echoing across the banks. She remembered Minjae's words in Seoul. "Even if we speak different languages, it touches the same heart." She thought of their conversations and about music, poetry, and life, and realized how much she had grown. Her translations were sharper, richer, more emotionally accurate. More than that, she felt a quiet pride in her own voice, knowing she was not just a bridge for someone else's words, but a storyteller in her own right. Lina also reflected on her faith, softly praying each night for guidance and strength. She didn't pray for Minjae's return or for romance. She prayed for clarity, courage, and the ability to honor the stories she was entrusted with. Meanwhile, in Seoul, Minjae walked through quiet streets, observing life with the same careful attention Lina had seen in him before. He interviewed filmmakers and storytellers, often imagining how Lina would interpret their words, how she would convey emotion that could not be captured literally. He realized he had come to rely on her perspective more than he expected. Her translations weren't only about language, they were about understanding nuance, culture, and human experience. He noticed the quiet absence her presence left, the gentle corrections, the subtle observations, the patient guidance. In moments alone, he reflected on the bond forming between them, not romance, not passion, but a recognition of compatibility of hearts and minds, a mutual respect that grew in silence and in shared understanding. During this separation, both Lina and Minjae faced challenges that tested their resilience. Lina struggled with artists who were hesitant to share their personal stories, and she had to navigate skepticism while maintaining cultural respect. She learned to advocate gently for authenticity, to be patient and to trust her instincts. Minjae faced deadlines and the pressure of refining scripts that captured the essence of both cultures. He realized that even the most brilliant words could fall flat without emotional truth. He began to write with the awareness that Lina's translations would carry his intentions across continents, making their partnership essential. Through these experiences, both realized a subtle truth. Connection could grow even in absence, and self-growth could prepare hearts for reunions stronger than before. One quiet evening in Lagos, Lina stood on her balcony, looking at the city lights. She whispered a small prayer. "Thank you for giving me the courage to trust myself, to honor the voices I translate, and to grow in patience and understanding." Somewhere over the sky, thousands of miles away, Minjae paused in his apartment in Seoul, staring at the Han River. He whispered quietly, "Thank you for showing me what listening truly means, and for teaching me that hearts can speak louder than words." Though apart, they were learning parallel lessons about culture, empathy, and patience. The separation was not a pause in their story, it was a deepening of it, a preparation for the next chapter where hearts could reconnect with clarity and purpose. And somewhere in the quiet spaces between continents, the seeds of something more than professional respect were quietly taking root, a bond built on understanding, shared values, and the gentle recognition of each other's hearts. The plane from Lagos touched down in Seoul on a crisp morning. Lina stepped out into the familiar cold air, her breath forming soft clouds. The city had changed for her. It now felt layered with memory, lessons, and anticipation. Her time apart from Minjae had sharpened her understanding of herself, of her abilities, and of the subtle connection that had quietly grown between them. At the hotel lobby, she spotted him immediately. Minjae stood near the concierge desk, quietly observing the flow of people, calm as ever, yet something in his posture shifted the moment he saw her. His eyes softened, and for a moment words were unnecessary. "Lina," he said, his voice carrying a warmth that felt like home. She smiled, a mixture of relief and joy blooming within her. "Minjae." They walked together toward the elevator, the silence comfortable this time, not awkward but shared. It was a silence that spoke of trust, patience, and understanding forged in distance. Their first day back at the studio was a quiet celebration of progress. Scripts were reviewed, translations refined, and cultural nuances carefully aligned. Yet beneath the professional activity, a subtle emotional resonance had returned. They laughed more freely, listened more attentively, and moved through the work with an ease that only comes from deep, mutual respect. During a lunch break in a small Hanok courtyard, Minjae asked about Lina's experiences in Lagos. She shared stories of her interviews, the challenges she had faced, and the insights she had gained. He listened intently, asking thoughtful questions and noting details that most would overlook. "You've grown," he said quietly, almost as if he were speaking to himself. "I see it in how you speak, how you carry the stories." Lina's heart warmed, but she kept her focus on the table before her. "Soul changed me too," she admitted. "But the distance taught me more about patience, trust, and listening, about carrying the heart of a story without losing its soul." Minjae nodded, his expression thoughtful. "And about understanding people. I've learned that language is only the beginning. Listening is the bridge." For the first time, Lina realized that the journey had been as much about them as individuals as about the stories they were translating. A few days later, they visited a small village on the outskirts of Seoul, home to elder storytellers who preserved centuries-old traditions. Lina translated each interview with care, capturing emotion and intent, while Minjae listened and took notes, occasionally asking clarifying questions. At one point, an elder spoke of connection across generations, how stories passed down through time carried wisdom and love. Lina translated slowly, feeling the weight of each word. Minjae's eyes softened and he looked at her, a quiet acknowledgement passing between them, of trust, understanding, and something that neither had yet named. When the day ended, they walked along a path lined with blossoming cherry trees. The air was crisp, petals occasionally drifting to the ground. Minjae paused, turning to her. "You've taught me something," he said softly, "about patience, about presence, and about how to carry another person's heart with care." Lina's chest warmed, a gentle ache of emotion she could not yet fully define. "And you've taught me," she replied, "to listen deeply, to trust, and to see that understanding comes before words." For a long moment they walked in silence, letting the words settle. Then, almost instinctively, Minjae extended his hand. Lina hesitated, then placed hers lightly in his. It was not a dramatic gesture, not a confession, but a quiet acknowledgement of hearts aligned. Back at the hotel, they reviewed the final scripts for the film project. The story they had crafted together now held not only cultural depth, but a layer of emotional resonance they had never anticipated. Each translated word, each carefully observed nuance reflected the mutual respect and care they had developed over weeks of collaboration. During a pause, Lina looked at Minjae. "Do you realize," she said softly, "that this story is as much ours as it is theirs?" He smiled faintly. "Yes, and I hope it carries the understanding we've found in each other." Her heart fluttered not with romantic intensity, but with the quiet joy of recognition that connection, trust, and respect can be as profound as any spoken declaration. The following day, they visited a small cultural festival celebrating both Korean and African arts. Music, dance, and storytelling intertwined, bridging continents in ways that made Lina reflect on her own journey. She watched Minji observe, ask questions, and engage with artists and performers with the same quiet attentiveness he had always shown her. She realized then that their separation had strengthened not only their professional abilities but their understanding of one another. Emotional bonds had grown in silence, through gestures, trust, and shared purpose. When a young musician performed a traditional African melody on a modern instrument, Minjae looked at Lina, eyes softening. "This," he said quietly, "is the heart speaking across worlds." Lina nodded, understanding fully. "And it's been teaching us how to listen." They smiled at each other, an unspoken promise lingering in the air, a promise of mutual respect, emotional care, and the quiet beginnings of a deeper bond. That evening after the festival, Lina and Minjae walked along the quiet streets of Seoul, lanterns casting a soft glow on the cobblestones. The city felt peaceful, layered with memory, experience, and the delicate rhythm of hearts finally aligned. "I never expected this journey," Lina said softly, "to change me so much, or to bring someone who understands without explanation." Minjae glanced at her, a small smile playing on his lips. "Sometimes," he said quietly, "the heart knows what the mind cannot see." And in the gentle silence that followed, Lina realized that their hearts had quietly reunited, not with grand gestures, not with declarations, but through shared growth, respect, and the understanding of one another's souls. The journey was far from over, but the bridge between them, and between their worlds, had been strengthened. Seoul's spring had begun to awaken, soft petals drifting through the streets carrying a quiet promise of renewal. Lina and Minjae walked along the Han River, their steps in sync, their conversation flowing easily. The weeks of collaboration, cultural immersion, and shared experiences had culminated not only in a completed project, but in something subtler and far more enduring: mutual understanding, trust, and a bond that transcended words. They paused at a quiet riverside park, the water reflecting the pastel glow of the setting sun. Lina watched a group of children flying kites, laughter ringing across the gentle breeze. She thought about the journey, from the crowded streets of Lagos to the meticulous streets of Seoul, from tentative first meetings to quiet moments of shared understanding. Minjae looked at her, noticing the thoughtful expression on her face. "You've changed," he said softly, "and not just because of Seoul or Lagos, but because of what you've carried and shared along the way." Lina smiled. "And you've changed too. I've seen patience, reflection, and care grow in ways I didn't expect." Their conversation drifted naturally, no tension, no expectations, only the calm presence of two hearts fully seen by one another. Back at the hotel, they finalized the project. The scripts were polished, translations complete, and cultural nuances delicately woven in. The team preparing for the film expressed gratitude for their dedication, noting how the depth of understanding Lina and Minjae brought to the project would resonate with audiences worldwide. But for Lina and Minjae, the achievement went beyond professional success. It was the realization that collaboration, patience, and mutual respect could produce something more meaningful than any accolade, a bridge not only between cultures, but between hearts. A few days later, they were invited to a small exhibition showcasing the artists, musicians, and storytellers whose work they had translated. The gallery was filled with vibrant paintings, rhythmic music, and spoken word performances. Lina moved through the room, translating for international visitors, while Minjae observed, taking quiet notes and asking questions that honored the creator's intent. At one point, a young Nigerian artist approached Lina, holding a small painting. "Thank you," he said, "for telling my story in a way I could never have done myself." Lina's eyes softened. "You did the story," she replied gently. "I only helped carry it." Minjae stood beside her, and for the first time she noticed a subtle emotion in his gaze: admiration, respect, and something quietly tender. She smiled, realizing that their shared work had created not only understanding between worlds, but a deep emotional connection between them. As the exhibition ended, Lina and Minjae stepped outside into the night. The streets were quiet, lanterns casting a soft glow over the cobblestones. They walked together in silence, each carrying reflections of the journey. "Do you ever think about what comes next?" Lina asked softly. Minjae considered it. "I think about the stories we've carried, the people we've met, and what it taught us about listening, understanding, and patience. That is what comes next, living what we've learned." Lina nodded, realizing that their journey had been more than professional. It had been a path of growth, a quiet awakening of hearts, and a reminder that connection is built on empathy and care, not declarations or spectacle. A few days later, Lina returned to Lagos. The city welcomed her with familiar warmth: sun-scorched streets, the laughter of children, the scent of roasted plantain and suya. Yet she was different now. Seoul had left its mark: patience, attention to detail, and an appreciation for subtlety. She felt stronger, more confident in her voice, and more aware of how to carry stories with care. She often reflected on Minjae's calm presence, his quiet attentiveness, and his ability to listen fully. She realized that their bond was not built on romance alone, but on shared growth, trust, and respect. Weeks later, a package arrived from Seoul, a small notebook filled with Minjae's notes, sketches, and reflections from their journey. A single note on the first page read, "For Lina, thank you for teaching me how to listen, how to carry hearts, and how to see the world through patience and care." Lina smiled, turning the pages slowly. Each note, each observation, felt like a gentle echo of the time they had shared. She whispered a quiet prayer of gratitude, not only for the journey but for the person who had walked beside her with care and understanding. Months later, the film they had worked on premiered. Audiences from Africa, Korea, and beyond celebrated the rich storytelling, the respectful cultural portrayal, and the emotional depth that Lina and Minjae had infused into the project. Yet behind the scenes, the true achievement was the bridge they had built between themselves, a connection stronger than distance, grounded in empathy, respect, and quiet emotional understanding. Lina and Minjae watched the premiere together side by side, content in the knowledge that their journey, both professional and personal, had reached a place of harmony. The world outside continued its rhythm, yet within them there was stillness, understanding, and a sense of shared purpose. They had begun as strangers from different continents, carrying different stories and dreams. Now they were collaborators, friends, and quietly, hearts aligned. And as they stepped outside into the night, the city lights reflecting on the streets, Lina realized something profound. True connection is not in grand gestures or declarations, but in the care we carry for one another, the patience we show, and the hearts we learn to understand. Yidispoksiku, bridge between Africa and Korea, had been completed, not only in art and storytelling, but in the hearts of two people who had learned to carry each other's worlds with tenderness and respect.